The year was 1818, and the English court flourished under the reign of a sovereign whose eyes missed nothing and whose memory forgot even less. Within the marble corridors of the royal palace, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across portraits of long-dead monarchs, the aristocracy performed their eternal ballet of politics, passion, and propriety. Queen Victoria Adelaide sat upon her throne with the bearing of one born to command empires. Her steel-gray eyes, sharp as winter frost, surveyed her court with the calculating precision of a master chess player. Every morning, she received reports from her network of loyal servants, ladies-in-waiting, and courtiers who understood that information was the most precious currency in this glittering world of silk and secrets. The palace itself stood as a monument to British supremacy, its Georgian architecture a testament to order and refinement. Vast state rooms adorned with Gobelin tapestries stretched endlessly, their walls lined with gilt-framed mirrors that reflected the elaborate costumes of the nobility. Persian carpets muffled the footsteps of dozens of servants who glided silently through the corridors like shadows, their eyes downcast, but their ears perpetually alert. In this world, reputation was everything and scandal was death. The strict protocols governing court life had been refined over centuries, creating an intricate web of rules that dictated everything from the depth of one's courtesy to the precise moment when one might speak in the royal presence. Ladies wore their finest silks and satins, their waists cinched by whalebone corsets that forced them into postures of perfect propriety. Gentlemen adorned themselves in velvet coats with gold thread embroidery, their neckcloths tied with mathematical precision. The morning ritual of court presentations had begun at precisely 9 o'clock, as it had every day for decades. Noble families arrived in ornate carriages pulled by matching pairs of Arabian horses, their coachmen resplendent in royal livery. The sound of wheels on cobblestones echoed through the palace courtyard as England's most powerful families converged to pay homage to their sovereign. Lady Margaret Ashworth, the Countess of Fairhaven, descended from her carriage with a fluid grace that had made her legendary throughout European courts. At 28, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that inspired poets and tormented married men. Her auburn hair was arranged in the latest fashion, with delicate ringlets framing a face that seemed carved from the finest porcelain. Her morning dress of emerald silk complemented eyes the color of deep forest pools, while her jewelry spoke of ancient family wealth and impeccable taste. Behind her followed her husband, Charles Ashworth, the Earl of Fairhaven, a man whose political ambitions were matched only by his complete lack of understanding regarding his wife's inner world. 15 years her senior, he carried himself with the confidence of inherited privilege and the assumption that his title guaranteed his wife's devotion. His attention was perpetually focused on matters of state, leaving Margaret to navigate the treacherous social waters of court life, largely alone. The palace guards stood at attention as the royal family made their appearance. These were not ordinary soldiers, but men chosen for their impressive bearing and unwavering loyalty. Among them stood Captain James Morrison, whose recent promotion had brought him to the palace guard from the battlefields of Waterloo. At 31, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced death and emerged victorious. His military uniform, deep blue with silver buttons, fit his broad shoulders perfectly, while his dark hair was cropped in the severe military fashion that emphasized his strong jawline and penetrating blue eyes. Captain Morrison had served with distinction under Wellington, earning his promotion through valor rather than birth. This distinction made him something of an anomaly in a court where breeding typically trumped ability. His presence reminded everyone that England's recent victories had created a new class of heroes whose claims to recognition came from merit rather than bloodline. The Queen's morning audience proceeded with the clockwork precision that characterized all court functions. Each presentation followed ancient protocols: the announcement of names and titles, the measured approach to the throne, the prescribed curtsy or bow, the brief exchange of pleasantries, and the graceful withdrawal. It was a carefully choreographed dance that reinforced the social hierarchy while allowing the monarch to observe her subjects closely. As Lady Margaret approached the throne for her weekly presentation, her silk slippers whispered against the polished marble floor. The Queen's penetrating gaze settled upon her with particular interest, noting the subtle changes in posture and expression that years of observation had taught her to recognize. There was something different about the Countess today, a barely perceptible shift in her usual composure that immediately captured the royal attention. The exchange of pleasantries proceeded normally, with Lady Margaret inquiring about the Queen's health and expressing appropriate gratitude for royal favor. But Queen Victoria Adelaide's trained eye caught the fleeting glance that passed between the Countess and Captain Morrison as she withdrew from the royal presence. It lasted no more than a heartbeat, yet it contained volumes of unspoken communication that set alarm bells ringing in the monarch's mind. The morning's remaining presentations passed in a blur of titled names and practiced genuflections, but the Queen's attention remained fixed on this potentially explosive discovery. Years of ruling had taught her that the most dangerous threats to stability often began with seemingly innocent human emotions. Love, she had learned, was the most unpredictable force in any kingdom, capable of toppling governments and destroying carefully maintained alliances. The palace gardens stretched across 20 acres of perfectly manicured landscape, where ancient oak trees provided discreet alcoves for private conversations. It was here, 3 months earlier, that fate had first thrown Lady Margaret and Captain Morrison together in circumstances that would forever alter the course of their lives. Margaret had been seeking refuge from another tedious afternoon of court gossip when she stumbled upon the captain drilling a group of new recruits in the art of swordsmanship. The sight of his fluid movements, the precise control of his blade, and the quiet authority with which he commanded his men had stopped her in her tracks. Here was a man who had earned his position through capability rather than inheritance, whose strength came from character rather than title. Their first conversation had been innocent enough, prompted by her genuine curiosity about military life and his respectful answers to her questions. Margaret had spent her entire life surrounded by men who viewed her as an ornamental asset, valued for her beauty and breeding, but never consulted about matters of substance. Captain Morrison, however, spoke to her as an equal, engaging her intellect and respecting her opinions in a way that was both thrilling and dangerous. James Morrison had recognized the peril immediately. The Countess of Fairhaven was not merely beautiful. She possessed a sharp intelligence and a passionate nature that her position in society forced her to conceal. During their carefully chaperoned conversations in the garden, he had glimpsed the woman beneath the aristocratic facade and found himself utterly captivated by her quick wit and genuine warmth. Their meetings had begun accidentally, but gradually became deliberate. Margaret would time her garden walks to coincide with his patrol duties, while James would extend his rounds to ensure their paths crossed. Each encounter deepened their connection, building an emotional intimacy that was far more dangerous than any physical affair. The Queen's network of informants was vast and sophisticated, consisting of loyal servants who had spent decades perfecting the art of observation. Lady Catherine Worthington, the Queen's senior lady-in-waiting, had served the crown for 30 years and possessed an intuitive understanding of romantic intrigue that made her invaluable. Her sharp eyes had noticed the subtle changes in Lady Margaret's behavior, the increased attention to her appearance before garden walks, the distracted air during court functions, and the telltale signs of a woman falling in love despite herself. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the head housekeeper, commanded an army of servants whose duties took them into every corner of the palace. Her reports to Lady Catherine included observations about the Countess's altered routine, her tendency to linger near windows overlooking the parade grounds, and her request for tea to be served in the garden pavilion at precisely the times when Captain Morrison conducted his patrols. The Earl of Fairhaven remained blissfully unaware of his wife's emotional awakening, consumed as he was with his latest political machinations. Charles Ashworth had married Margaret for her beauty and family connections, viewing their union as a strategic alliance that enhanced his social standing. He provided her with luxury and status while expecting little more than her presence at social functions and her cooperation in producing an heir. Their marriage exemplified the aristocratic approach to romantic relationships, where love was considered a pleasant bonus rather than a necessary foundation. Charles conducted his own discreet affairs with the casual assumption that his wife would maintain appropriate appearances while finding her own sources of fulfillment within the narrow confines of acceptable feminine pursuits. Margaret's awakening to genuine passion had been gradual but inexorable. James Morrison represented everything that was missing from her carefully ordered existence: authenticity, earned respect, and the intoxicating possibility of being valued for her true self rather than her social position. Their conversations ranged from military strategy to literature, from political philosophy to personal dreams, creating an intellectual and emotional connection that made her marriage feel like an elaborate performance. The physical attraction between them was undeniable, but remained strictly controlled by mutual understanding of the catastrophic consequences that would follow any impropriety. A single touch of hands while examining a rose bush, a moment when their eyes held too long across a crowded room, the brush of fabric when he helped her navigate a garden path. These tiny infractions felt enormous in a world where reputation was everything. James found himself caught between honor and desire, knowing that his feelings for the Countess could destroy both their lives if discovered. His military training had taught him discipline and self-control, but Margaret's presence tested every principle he held dear. She was forbidden fruit in the most literal sense, protected by laws and social conventions that made even friendship between them a form of treason. The palace chaplain, Father Benedict Whitmore, had begun to notice changes in the Countess's confession patterns. A man of discretion and wisdom, he recognized the signs of soul in turmoil without requiring explicit details. Margaret's prayers had taken on an urgency that spoke of internal conflict, while her charitable works had intensified as if she were trying to atone for sins of the heart. Young Lord Timothy Ashworth, Margaret's 16-year-old stepson from the Earl's first marriage, possessed the sharp observational skills common to intelligent adolescents. His casual mentions of seeing the Countess in deep conversation with various palace staff members had initially seemed innocent, but taken together, they painted a picture of a woman seeking emotional connections outside her prescribed social circle. The Queen's afternoon audiences provided another opportunity for observation. Her Majesty had developed the skill of reading faces and body language with scientific precision, noting how Margaret's attention seemed divided during court functions. The Countess would respond appropriately to questions and comments, but her eyes would drift toward windows and doorways as if she were waiting for someone specific to appear. Lady Margaret's maid, Sarah Pemberton, had served her mistress for 8 years and understood the subtle indicators of her moods better than anyone. Sarah had noticed the increased care with which the Countess selected her walking attire, the particular attention to her hair arrangement on certain mornings, and the way she would pause at her dressing room window to observe the parade grounds below. Captain Morrison's fellow officers had begun to comment on his improved demeanor and increased enthusiasm for palace duties. Lieutenant Robert Sinclair, his closest friend and confidant, had remarked on James's unusual interest in horticulture and his tendency to volunteer for garden patrol assignments that had previously been considered tedious. The dangerous game of hidden affection continued, with each participant believing their secret was safe, unaware that the Queen's vast intelligence network was methodically documenting every glance, every conversation, and every deviation from normal routine. The Grand Autumn Ball represented the pinnacle of the social season, where England's most prestigious families gathered in a magnificent display of wealth, power, and strategic matchmaking. The palace ballroom, with its soaring ceilings adorned with cherub-painted frescoes and crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow patterns across the marble floor, served as the perfect backdrop for this elaborate theater of aristocratic life. Lady Margaret appeared that evening in a gown that immediately marked her as the season's most spectacular beauty. The dress, crafted from midnight blue silk that seemed to capture and reflect light with every movement, featured a low neckline that showcased her family's sapphire necklace while remaining within the bounds of propriety. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate construction of curls and braids threaded with pearls, creating a crown-like effect that enhanced her natural elegance. The Earl of Fairhaven escorted his wife with the satisfied air of a man displaying his most prized possession. Charles had commissioned the dress from London's most exclusive modiste, understanding that his wife's appearance reflected directly upon his own status and taste. He introduced her proudly to visiting dignitaries and potential political allies, using her beauty and charm as instruments of diplomacy. Captain Morrison stood at attention along the ballroom's perimeter, his military uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate civilian costumes surrounding him. Palace protocol required the guard to maintain absolute stillness and focus, but James found his discipline severely tested as he watched Margaret glide through the crowd with fluid grace. Every instinct screamed at him to look away, to focus on his duties, but the magnetic pull of her presence made such restraint nearly impossible. The Queen observed these interactions from her elevated throne, her position providing a perfect vantage point for monitoring the complex social dynamics playing out below. Her Majesty had perfected the art of appearing to focus on official duties while simultaneously cataloging every meaningful glance, every subtle gesture, and every breach of protocol occurring within her domain. Lady Catherine Worthington maintained her position beside the throne, ready to relay the Queen's observations and receive whispered instructions. Years of experience had taught her to recognize the signs of developing scandal, and tonight's ball was providing an abundance of concerning indicators that would require careful documentation. The orchestra, positioned in an elegant alcove decorated with fresh flowers and trailing ivy, began the evening's musical program with a stately minuet that allowed for formal presentations and preliminary social maneuvering. As the evening progressed, the dances would become more intimate and energetic, providing increased opportunities for private conversation and romantic development. Lord Edmund Blackwood, a visiting diplomat from the Austrian court, had immediately fixed his attention upon Lady Margaret with the calculating interest of a man seeking advantageous alliances. His pursuit was both flattering and perfectly appropriate, as his title and wealth made him an acceptable dance partner despite the potential for gossip. The Earl of Fairhaven actively encouraged this attention, seeing opportunities for future diplomatic cooperation. Margaret found herself trapped in a web of social obligations that required her to smile graciously while feeling emotionally suffocated. Lord Blackwood's conversation was witty and sophisticated, but it felt hollow compared to her discussions with James. Every comment about politics or culture reminded her of how differently the captain approached such topics, with genuine passion rather than calculated positioning. During the third dance of the evening, a lively country dance that required frequent partner exchanges, fate engineered a moment that would prove pivotal to the unfolding drama. As couples moved through the prescribed patterns, Margaret found herself temporarily partnered with Captain Morrison, who had been temporarily pressed in a service to balance the numbers. The touch of his gloved hand upon hers sent electricity through both participants, while the required movements of the dance brought them into closer proximity than they had ever experienced. For 30 seconds, they moved in perfect harmony, their bodies responding to the music and to each other with an instinctive understanding that transcended conscious thought. James spoke quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "You look magnificent tonight, my lady, like a sapphire among diamonds." Margaret's response was equally soft, but carried dangerous emotional weight. "I had hoped you would notice. I chose this color because it matches your uniform." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither could cross without abandoning everything they had been taught about duty and propriety. When the dance pattern separated them moments later, both felt the loss like a physical pain that threatened to overwhelm their carefully maintained composure. Queen Victoria Adelaide had witnessed this exchange through her opera glasses, missing neither the intimate tone of their conversation nor the obvious emotional impact of their brief contact. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, but internally she was calculating the potential ramifications of allowing this situation to continue unchecked. The remainder of the ball passed in a blur of enforced normalcy that fooled no one with the skill to observe closely. Margaret danced with appropriate partners while maintaining perfect social behavior, but her attention remained focused on a uniformed figure standing motionless along the ballroom's edge. James maintained his military bearing while struggling with emotions that threatened to crack his professional facade. Lady Catherine noted that the Countess requested refreshment more frequently than usual, each trip to the refreshment table requiring passage near the section of wall where Captain Morrison was stationed. These brief encounters allowed for fleeting eye contact and subtle acknowledgments that would have been invisible to casual observers, but were perfectly clear to trained watchers. The Earl of Fairhaven noticed nothing amiss, engaged as he was in political discussions that he considered far more important than the social niceties surrounding him. His conversations with Lord Blackwood about trade agreements and military alliances proceeded smoothly, enhanced by his wife's obvious appeal to the visiting diplomat. As the evening drew toward its conclusion, tradition required a final waltz reserved for married couples. Margaret found herself in her husband's arms, moving through steps they had performed countless times before, while her heart remained with the man who watched them from across the room. The irony was not lost on her that she was dancing with her legal partner while every fiber of her being yearned for the forbidden one. James observed this final dance with emotions that ranged from jealousy to despair, knowing that he was witnessing the symbol of everything that separated them. The Earl's proprietary hold on his wife, the easy way they moved together in public, and the social approval surrounding their union all reinforced the impossibility of a situation. When the ball finally ended and guests began their elaborate departure rituals, Margaret managed one final glance toward James before being escorted to her carriage. That look contained everything she could not say: gratitude for his presence, regret for their circumstances, and a promise that whatever happened, she would remember this evening as the moment when her heart finally acknowledged its true desire. The Queen retired to her private chambers with much to contemplate. The evening had provided confirmation of her suspicions while revealing the depth of the emotional connection developing between the Countess and her guard. Such situations required delicate handling, as the wrong response could create martyrs rather than solutions. The morning following the Grand Autumn Ball dawned gray and misty, perfectly matching the emotional turmoil that gripped both participants in the previous evening's dangerous dance. Lady Margaret awoke with a mixture of exhilaration and terror, knowing that the brief moments in James's arms had irrevocably changed something fundamental within her heart. The memory of his whispered compliment and her own bold admission replayed endlessly in her mind, each recollection both thrilling and terrifying. Captain Morrison had spent a sleepless night wrestling with the implications of their exchange. Military discipline had taught him to compartmentalize emotions and focus on duty. But the image of Margaret in her sapphire gown, the feel of her hand in his, and the knowledge that she had chosen her attire to match his uniform created an emotional storm that threatened to overwhelm his legendary self-control. The Queen's morning routine included a private audience with Lady Catherine Worthington, during which the previous evening's observations were discussed in detail. These conversations had evolved into sophisticated intelligence briefings where every nuance of court behavior was analyzed for potential threats to stability and order. "Your Majesty," Lady Catherine began carefully. "Last evening's ball provided several concerning observations regarding the Countess of Fairhaven and Captain Morrison. Their behavior, while maintaining perfect propriety in technical terms, suggests an emotional connection that could prove problematic if allowed to develop further." Queen Victoria Adelaide's response was measured and thoughtful. "Indeed, Lady Catherine, I have been monitoring this situation for several weeks, and I fear we are witnessing the development of precisely the sort of scandal that could damage both the Crown's reputation and the stability of an important political alliance. The Earl of Fairhaven's cooperation is essential to our current diplomatic initiatives with Austria." The Queen's decision to take direct action came after careful consideration of all possible consequences. Rather than immediately confronting the participants or exposing the situation publicly, she chose a more subtle approach that would test the true nature of their relationship while providing opportunities for them to demonstrate their loyalty to Crown and country. Lady Margaret's morning walk in the palace gardens proceeded according to her established routine, though today she felt as though every servant and courtier was observing her with unusual interest. The sensation of being watched had become increasingly pronounced over recent weeks, but she attributed it to the natural paranoia that accompanied secret emotions. James had been specifically assigned to escort a visiting military delegation through the palace grounds, a duty that would normally have filled him with professional pride, but now felt like an elaborate form of torture. Knowing that Margaret would be in the gardens while he was required to focus on his official responsibilities created an internal conflict that tested every principle of his military training. The meeting that would change everything occurred near the Rose Garden's most secluded alcove, where ancient oak trees created a natural screen from casual observation. Margaret had been examining the late-blooming roses when James's delegation appeared on the main path, their voices carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air. Unable to resist the opportunity for even a brief glimpse of him, Margaret positioned herself where she would be visible from the path while maintaining the appearance of innocent gardening interest. When James noticed her presence, the momentary disruption in his professional demeanor was slight but unmistakable to anyone watching closely. General Sir William Thornfield, the delegation's leader and James's former commanding officer, immediately recognized the signs of personal distraction in his protege. Years of military experience had taught him to read men's faces with scientific precision, and Captain Morrison's sudden tension was as obvious as a battle flag. "That is the Countess of Fairhaven, is it not?" the general inquired with apparent casualness. "A remarkably beautiful woman. I understand she has been quite the sensation at court." James's response, carefully neutral in tone, but delayed by a fraction of a second too long, confirmed the general's suspicions. "Yes, sir. Lady Margaret is considered one of the court's most accomplished ladies." The use of her first name, while not technically inappropriate, suggested a familiarity that raised immediate questions about the nature of their acquaintance. General Thornfield filed this observation away for future consideration, understanding that Captain Morrison's career could be severely damaged by any hint of impropriety involving a married noblewoman. Margaret, unaware that this brief encounter was being analyzed with military precision, attempted to continue her garden exploration while fighting the urge to approach the delegation. Every instinct urged her to find an excuse for conversation, But years of social training had taught her to recognize the boundaries that could not be crossed without serious consequences. The Queen's intelligence network provided real-time updates on these developments through a system of hand signals and strategic positioning that had been refined over decades. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell observed from the conservatory windows, while Lady Catherine maintained watch from the library balcony, their combined vantage points providing complete coverage of the garden area. Father Benedict Whitmore chose this moment to make an unexpected appearance in the gardens, ostensibly for his daily constitutional, but actually to observe the developing situation at closer range. His clerical status allowed him to move freely through all areas of the palace while maintaining perfect cover for intelligence gathering. The chaplain's arrival prompted Margaret to approach him for conversation, a perfectly natural action that nonetheless brought her within speaking distance of James's delegation. The ensuing exchange of pleasantries required James to acknowledge her presence officially, creating the first documented public interaction between them that extended beyond mere courtesy. "Captain Morrison," Margaret said with carefully controlled warmth, "I hope you found last evening's ball enjoyable. The music was particularly fine." James's response required careful navigation between honesty and discretion. "Indeed, my lady. The orchestra's performance was exceptional, and the dancing was most elegant." General Thornfield noted the subtle emphasis on dancing and the way both participants seemed to find deeper meaning in this conventional exchange. Years of diplomacy had taught him to recognize coded communications, and this conversation contained undercurrents that suggested significant prior interaction. Father Whitmore's contribution to the conversation provided additional insight into the situation's complexity. "The Countess has been most generous in her support of our charitable works, Captain. Her dedication to helping the less fortunate speaks well of her character." This information revealed that Margaret had been seeking opportunities for meaningful activity beyond court social life, possibly as a way of finding purpose in a world that offered limited outlets for intelligent women. Such seeking often indicated emotional dissatisfaction that could make individuals susceptible to romantic entanglements. The delegation's departure was handled with perfect military precision, but not before General Thornfield had gathered sufficient evidence to form definitive conclusions about his subordinate's emotional state. Captain Morrison's obvious reluctance to leave the area, combined with his repeated glances backward toward the Countess, painted a clear picture of romantic attachment. Margaret remained in the garden long after the delegation's departure, ostensibly continuing her examination of the roses, but actually struggling with emotions that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. The brief conversation with James, conducted under the observation of others, had felt both thrilling and frustrating, like trying to express a symphony through telegraph signals. The Queen received detailed reports of these developments within the hour, delivered through the sophisticated communication system that kept her informed of every significant occurrence within her domain. The time for subtle observation had passed. The situation now required direct intervention before it developed into a full-scale scandal that could damage multiple reputations and political relationships. The summons arrived at dawn, delivered by a royal messenger whose grave expression immediately conveyed the seriousness of the situation. Lady Margaret was requested to present herself for a private audience with Her Majesty at precisely 10 o'clock, a timing that would ensure complete privacy while lending appropriate weight to the proceedings. Margaret's hands trembled as she read the formal invitation, understanding instinctively that her secret had been discovered. The Queen's reputation for omniscience was legendary throughout the court, and the Countess had always known that conducting any kind of clandestine relationship under such scrutiny was tantamount to playing with fire. Captain Morrison received his own summons through military channels, with General Thornfield personally delivering the order to report to the Queen's private study for immediate consultation on matters of palace security. The phrasing was diplomatically neutral, but James recognized the gravity of his situation from his superior officer's somber demeanor. "Morrison," the general said quietly, "whatever has transpired between you and the Countess of Fairhaven, you must understand that your military career and personal honor hang in the balance. The Queen is not known for mercy when it comes to breaches of protocol that threaten the stability of her court." The Queen's private study served as the setting for this confrontation, its walls lined with portraits of previous monarchs who had faced similar challenges to royal authority and social order. The room's intimate scale and rich decoration created an atmosphere of overwhelming power concentrated in a single individual who held the fate of empires in her hands. Lady Margaret entered first, her morning dress of dove gray, silk chosen deliberately to convey humility and contrition. Her usual confidence had been replaced by obvious anxiety, though she maintained the perfect posture and graceful bearing that had been drilled into her since childhood. The Queen observed these subtle changes with the practiced eye of someone who understood that body language often revealed more than words. "Lady Margaret," the Queen began without preamble, "you may be seated. We have matters of considerable delicacy to discuss, and I prefer to address such situations with directness rather than diplomatic circumnavigation." The Countess took the indicated chair with fluid grace, but her clasped hands betrayed the inner turmoil that her controlled expression sought to conceal. Years of court training had prepared her for many social challenges, but nothing had equipped her for a direct confrontation with royal authority regarding matters of the heart. "Your Majesty," Margaret replied with carefully modulated humility, "I am entirely at your service and prepared to address any concerns you may have regarding my conduct or behavior." Captain Morrison was announced and admitted to the study with military precision, his bearing absolutely correct despite the obvious tension that radiated from his carefully controlled posture. The sight of Margaret already present confirmed his worst fears while simultaneously providing the comfort of facing their fate together. Queen Victoria Adelaide allowed several moments of profound silence to emphasize the gravity of the situation before addressing both participants with the authority of absolute monarchy. Her voice carried the weight of centuries of royal tradition and the implicit threat of consequences that could destroy lives with casual efficiency. "Captain Morrison, Lady Margaret, I have requested this audience because my intelligence network has documented a pattern of behavior that suggests an emotional attachment between you that extends beyond the boundaries of appropriate court protocol. Before we proceed, I want to offer each of you the opportunity to address these observations directly and honestly." The Queen's approach demonstrated sophisticated understanding of human psychology, providing an opportunity for voluntary confession that would be less damaging than forced admission. Years of dealing with court intrigue had taught her that people often revealed more than they intended when given the chance to explain their actions. Margaret found her voice first, understanding that attempts at deception would only worsen their situation. "Your Majesty, I must confess that Captain Morrison and I have developed a friendship that may have appeared inappropriate to outside observers. However, our behavior has remained within the bounds of propriety, and we have taken no actions that would bring dishonor to the crown or to my marriage." James's military training urged him to accept full responsibility for the situation while protecting Margaret from any consequences. "Your Majesty, if my conduct has been inappropriate, the fault lies entirely with me. Lady Margaret has behaved with perfect propriety throughout our acquaintance, and any breach of protocol stems from my failure to maintain appropriate professional distance." The Queen's response revealed both the depth of her knowledge and the sophistication of her intelligence gathering. "I appreciate your honesty, though it is somewhat incomplete. My observers have documented numerous private conversations, meaningful glances, and subtle communications that suggest an emotional connection far deeper than casual friendship. Moreover, Last evening's ball provided clear evidence that your feelings for each other have moved well beyond the realm of appropriate social interaction. Lady Catherine Worthington entered at this moment, carrying a leather portfolio that contained detailed documentation of the observed interactions. The systematic nature of the surveillance became apparent as she presented written reports, witness statements, and even sketches that captured specific moments of apparent intimacy. The evidence is quite comprehensive, the Queen continued, accepting the portfolio with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Hartwell's household staff have noted changes in both your routines that coincide with opportunities for interaction. Father Whitmore has observed alterations in your confession patterns, Lady Margaret, that suggest emotional turmoil. Even your personal servants have noticed changes in your behavior that indicate romantic preoccupation. The presentation of this evidence created a moment of profound realization for both participants, who understood that their secret had been under systematic observation for weeks or possibly months. The sophistication of the Royal Intelligence Network became apparent as the Queen detailed specific conversations and interactions that they had believed were private. Margaret's composure finally cracked as the full implications of their situation became clear. Your Majesty, I understand the gravity of what you are revealing, but I must ask what you intend to do with this information. My marriage to the Earl of Fairhaven serves important political purposes, and any scandal could damage relationships that extend far beyond personal considerations. The Queen's response revealed the careful thought she had given to managing this crisis. Indeed, Lady Margaret, which is precisely why this situation requires immediate resolution. Your husband's cooperation is essential to current diplomatic initiatives with Austria, and Lord Blackwood's interest in expanded trade relationships depends partly on the stability of your social position. Captain Morrison stepped forward with military directness. Your Majesty, if my presence at court creates difficulties, I am prepared to request transfer to any posting you deem appropriate. My service to the Crown does not require proximity to situations that might compromise important political relationships. The Queen's evaluation of this offer revealed her understanding of the deeper implications. Captain, your military record is exemplary, and your service has been invaluable. However, the question is not simply one of physical separation, but of managing a situation that threatens to create lasting damage to multiple important relationships. The true test came when the Queen posed the question that would determine their ultimate fate. I need to understand the depth of your emotional attachment. Is this a passing infatuation that can be managed through appropriate distance and time, or have your feelings developed to a point where separation would create lasting damage to your ability to function effectively in your respective roles? The silence that followed this question contained volumes of unspoken communication between Margaret and James, who found themselves forced to evaluate their relationship under the most intense scrutiny possible. The romantic idealism that had sustained their secret meetings suddenly faced the harsh reality of political and social consequences. Margaret's answer came with painful honesty. Your Majesty, I cannot claim that my feelings are superficial or easily dismissed. Captain Morrison has shown me possibilities for intellectual and emotional connection that I had not previously experienced. However, I understand my duties to my husband, my family, and to the Crown, and I am prepared to honor those obligations regardless of personal cost. James's response demonstrated the honor that had made him a distinguished officer. Your Majesty, Lady Margaret represents everything admirable about English womanhood, and my feelings for her have grown beyond what I initially recognized as appropriate. However, my oath of service to the Crown supersedes all personal considerations, and I will accept whatever decision you make regarding our situation. The Queen's decision, when it came, demonstrated the sophisticated political calculus that had made her one of Europe's most effective monarchs. Rather than simply banishing one or both participants, She crafted a solution that addressed the immediate crisis while preserving the long-term interests of all parties involved. Lady Margaret, Captain Morrison, your honesty in this matter has been noted and appreciated. However, the reality of your situation requires immediate action to prevent a scandal that could damage not only your personal reputations, but also important political relationships that serve the broader interests of the realm. The Queen's proposal revealed weeks of careful planning designed to manage the crisis while minimizing collateral damage. Captain Morrison, I am promoting you to the rank of Major and assigning you to lead a diplomatic mission to India, where your military experience and personal character will serve important imperial interests. This assignment will last a minimum of 3 years and will provide opportunities for advancement that reflect your exemplary service record. The promotion represented both reward and exile, acknowledging James's military merit while removing him from the source of temptation. The Indian assignment would provide real opportunities for career advancement while ensuring that any future relationship with Margaret would be impossible to maintain. Lady Margaret, you will accompany your husband on an extended diplomatic tour of European courts, beginning with a 6-month residency in Vienna to support the Earl's negotiations with the Austrian government. This assignment will reinforce your position as one of England's most accomplished diplomatic wives, while providing distance from current circumstances. The Queen's solution demonstrated masterful understanding of human psychology and political necessity. Both participants would be removed from proximity to each other while being given roles that enhanced their social positions and provided meaningful work that could help them rebuild their lives. Margaret's response revealed both her intelligence and her acceptance of royal authority. Your Majesty, I understand the wisdom of your decision and am prepared to fulfill whatever role you believe best serves the interests of the crown. My husband's diplomatic work is indeed important, and I will endeavor to support it with all my abilities. James accepted his assignment with military precision while struggling with emotions that threatened to overwhelm his professional composure. Your Majesty, I am honored by your confidence and will serve in India with the same dedication I have brought to all my military duties. The Empire's interests will always supersede personal considerations. The Queen's final instructions revealed the depth of her understanding regarding the human costs of political necessity. Before you assume your new duties, you will each have one final private conversation to bring closure to your relationship. This meeting will take place in the chapel under Father Whitmore's supervision, allowing you to address whatever needs to be said while maintaining appropriate spiritual and moral guidance. Lady Catherine escorted Margaret from the royal study with the gentle efficiency that had characterized decades of managing difficult court situations. The Countess's composure held until they reached the privacy of her apartments, where the full emotional impact of the Queen's decision finally overwhelmed her carefully maintained control. Sarah Pemberton, Margaret's loyal maid, provided comfort and practical assistance as her mistress struggled with the reality of permanent separation from the man who had awakened her heart to possibilities she had never imagined. The preparations for the European diplomatic tour would begin immediately, leaving little time for prolonged grief. Captain Morrison was escorted by General Thornfield to begin the administrative processes required for his new assignment. The promotion to Major represented a significant advancement that would normally have filled him with professional pride, but the circumstances surrounding it colored every aspect of his achievement with bittersweet regret. The chapel meeting took place at sunset, when the stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across the ancient stone walls that had witnessed centuries of human drama. Father Whitmore positioned himself discreetly near the altar, providing supervision while allowing for private conversation within the sacred space. Margaret arrived first, wearing a simple dress of midnight blue that reminded both participants of their brief dance at the Grand Autumn Ball. Her composure was perfect, But James could see the emotional cost of maintaining such control in the subtle tension around her eyes and the careful way she held her hands. "James," she began softly, using his first name for the first time in the presence of a witness. "I want you to know that these past months have been the most meaningful of my life. You showed me that it was possible to be valued for my thoughts and character rather than simply my appearance and social position." His response carried all the weight of unspoken possibilities and abandoned dreams. "Margaret, you have given me a gift I never expected to receive. In a world where my birth and background limited my social prospects, you treated me as an equal worthy of respect and affection. I will carry that knowledge with me wherever duty takes me." Father Whitmore's presence provided both comfort and constraint, reminding them that their conversation was taking place within the bounds of moral and social propriety. The chaplain had counseled many couples facing separation, and he understood the healing power of honest acknowledgement and mutual blessing. "We cannot change the circumstances of our birth or the duties that honor requires us to fulfill," Margaret continued with growing strength. "But we can choose to remember this time as proof that genuine connection between souls is possible, even when the world conspires to prevent it." James's military training had taught him to face impossible odds with courage and determination, but saying goodbye to Margaret tested every reserve of strength he possessed. "I promise that my service in India will honor the inspiration you have provided. Everything I accomplish will carry the memory of your faith in my potential." Their final moments together were observed by Father Whitmore with discretion and compassion, as two people who had found perfect compatibility accepted the impossibility of their situation with grace and dignity. When they exchanged final farewells, both understood that they were ending not just a relationship, but a chapter of their lives that could never be repeated. The Earl of Fairhaven remained unaware of the specific circumstances surrounding his wife's new enthusiasm for diplomatic service, attributing her cooperation to appropriate wifely duty and social ambition. The Austrian assignment represented a significant advancement in his political career, and Margaret's beauty and intelligence would indeed prove valuable assets in the sophisticated European courts. Major Morrison's departure for India was marked by appropriate military ceremony, with the Queen herself presenting his new commission in recognition of his distinguished service. The assignment would prove to be the foundation of a remarkable military and administrative career that would eventually earn him a knighthood and position as one of the empire's most trusted colonial administrators. Years later, both would look back on their brief but intense connection as the defining emotional experience of their lives. Margaret would become one of Europe's most accomplished diplomatic wives, using her intelligence and social skills to support her husband's increasingly important political career while finding fulfillment in meaningful work that served larger purposes. James would distinguish himself in India through a combination of military valor and administrative skill that earned him rapid promotion and eventual appointment as a provincial governor. His understanding of honor and duty, deepened by his experience with Margaret, would make him a legendary figure in imperial service. The Queen's handling of their crisis became a case study in sophisticated political management, demonstrating how personal scandals could be transformed into opportunities for strengthening the empire's human resources. Her decision to reward both participants while ensuring their separation preserved all important relationships while eliminating the threat of future disruption. Lady Catherine Worthington would later observe that the Queen's solution represented the perfect balance between human compassion and political necessity, acknowledging genuine emotions while protecting the stability of institutions that served millions of people across the British Empire. The chapel where they said their final farewell would be remembered by both as sacred ground, where they had chosen duty over desire, honor over happiness, and service to others over personal fulfillment. Their love story became one of noble sacrifice rather than tragic loss, inspiring rather than destroying the participants. In the final analysis, the Queen's discovery of their affair served as the catalyst for transformations that enhanced both their lives while preserving the political and social relationships that their scandal could have destroyed. Love, properly channeled, had made them better servants of crown and country rather than threats to stability and order. The palace gardens where their romance had bloomed continued to welcome new generations of courtiers, while the traditions and protocols they had respected in their moment of greatest temptation continued to preserve the stability of a realm that stretched across continents and encompassed millions of loyal subjects who depended on the crown's wisdom and strength. Their story became a testament to the possibility of finding meaning and purpose even when the heart's deepest desires must be sacrificed to honor and duty, proving that love's greatest expression sometimes lies not in possession, but in the willingness to let go for the sake of greater good. The ballroom of the Austrian embassy in London glittered with the same magnificent splendor that had once witnessed the brief dance between Margaret and James, but time had transformed both the setting and its players. Lady Margaret, now recognized throughout Europe as one of the most accomplished diplomatic hostesses of her generation, moved through the crowd with the confident grace of a woman who had found her purpose in service to something greater than herself. Her husband, the Earl of Fairhaven, had been elevated to Duke following his successful negotiations that had prevented a potentially devastating conflict between Austria and Prussia. The Duchess of Fairhaven, as she was now known, had played an instrumental role in these diplomatic triumphs, her intelligence and cultural sophistication proving invaluable in the delicate art of international relations. Across the empire, in the hill stations of India, where the monsoon rains created emerald landscapes of breathtaking beauty, Major General Sir James Morrison reviewed reports from his provincial administrators, while the evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine through his study windows. His transformation from palace guard to one of the empire's most trusted colonial leaders had been marked by a series of reforms that had improved relations between British administrators and local populations. The knighthood bestowed upon him 3 years earlier recognized not only his military achievements, but also his innovative approaches to governance that balanced imperial interests with local needs. His understanding of honor, duty, and sacrifice had made him a legendary figure among both British officers and Indian civil servants who admired his fairness and integrity. Back in the embassy ballroom, a young military attaché approached the Duchess with news that would stir memories she had carefully preserved in the deepest chambers of her heart. "Your Grace, I bring greetings from Sir James Morrison in Calcutta. He asked me to convey his congratulations on your recent appointment as cultural ambassador to the German courts." Margaret's response was perfectly controlled, though those who knew her well might have noticed the slight pause before she replied. "Please convey my appreciation for Sir James's kind words. I hope his service in India continues to bring him satisfaction and advancement." The formal words carried depths of meaning that only she and the distant recipient could fully understand. The Queen, now in her 70s but still possessed of the sharp intelligence that had made her reign legendary, maintained her network of correspondence with key figures throughout the empire. Her periodic letters to both Margaret and James contained no direct references to their past connection, but always included subtle inquiries about their well-being and accomplishments that spoke to her continued interest in their fates. In Vienna, where Margaret had spent 2 transformative years learning the intricate protocols of European diplomacy, she had established herself as a bridge between British interests and continental sensibilities. Her salon had become famous throughout the Austrian capital for attracting the most brilliant minds of the age, where discussions of literature, philosophy, and politics created an atmosphere of intellectual excitement that reminded her of her conversations with James in the palace gardens. The Duchess had never had children, a fact that had once caused her private grief, but which she had eventually accepted as perhaps allowing her to dedicate herself more completely to her diplomatic work. Instead, she had become mentor and patron to dozens of young women from diplomatic families, teaching them the skills necessary to navigate the complex social waters of international politics. Sir James had also remained unmarried, a choice that his colleagues attributed to his dedication to imperial service, but which those closest to him understood reflected a heart that had given itself completely once and found it impossible to replicate that connection. His administrative innovations in India included the establishment of schools for girls, a radical concept that had initially met with resistance but gradually gained acceptance as its benefits became apparent. The monsoon season in Calcutta provided Sir James with quiet evenings for reflection, when the sound of rain on tropical foliage created a symphony that somehow reminded him of English gardens in autumn. During these moments, he would allow himself to remember the woman who had awakened his understanding of love's transformative power, though he disciplined these thoughts carefully to preserve their purity. Margaret's evening routine in whatever European capital currently claimed her attention included a few minutes of private meditation before her bedroom window, where she would look toward the eastern sky and send silent wishes for the safety and happiness of the man who had shown her the possibility of true intellectual and emotional partnership. Their correspondence, which continued through carefully neutral channels involving mutual acquaintances and professional contacts, never ventured beyond appropriate bounds, but maintained a connection that both treasured as evidence that some human bonds transcend the limitations of time and circumstance. The Queen's annual review of imperial personnel files always paused thoughtfully when she encountered reports of Sir James's latest achievements or updates on the Duchess's diplomatic successes. Her decision 10 years earlier to separate them rather than destroy them had proven remarkably prescient, as both had channeled their frustrated love into service that had benefited the empire immeasurably. Young officers newly arrived in India often sought audiences with Sir James for advice on managing the challenges of colonial administration, and invariably came away impressed by his combination of firm authority and genuine compassion for all people under his jurisdiction. His reputation for fairness had made him one of the few British administrators trusted by both European settlers and local populations. Similarly, diplomatic wives throughout Europe sought the Duchess's guidance on navigating the complex social requirements of international relations. Her ability to bridge cultural differences while maintaining British interests had made her an invaluable asset to the Foreign Office, which regularly consulted her on matters requiring delicate cultural sensitivity. The chapel where they had said their final farewell had been renovated and expanded, its beauty enhanced by stained glass windows donated by grateful families throughout the empire. Father Whitmore, now elderly but still serving as palace chaplain, occasionally remembered the afternoon when two noble hearts had chosen duty over desire and offered prayers for their continued happiness and success. Lady Catherine Worthington, in her retirement, sometimes reflected on the Queen's masterful handling of what could have been a devastating scandal. The transformation of potential disaster into imperial advantage had become a classic case study in sophisticated crisis management, demonstrating how human emotions could be channeled into productive service rather than destructive rebellion. The palace gardens where Margaret and James had first discovered their connection continued to bloom with each changing season, their pathways witnessing new generations of courtiers and diplomats who unconsciously benefited from the precedent of honor and sacrifice established by two people who had loved wisely, if not wisely. As the years passed, both Margaret and James found that their separation had not diminished their love, but had refined it into something more precious than possession. The knowledge that they had chosen to serve something greater than themselves, and that their sacrifice had contributed to the stability and prosperity of millions of people across a vast empire. The evening stars that shone above London's embassy district and Calcutta's administrative quarter seemed to bridge the vast distance between them, carrying messages of enduring respect and affection that needed no words to convey their meaning. They had learned that love's highest expression sometimes lies not in what we take for ourselves, but in what we give to others, and that the greatest victories are often won not through conquest, but through willing surrender to duty and honor. Their legacy lived on in the diplomatic protocols that Margaret had helped establish, the administrative reforms that James had implemented, and the countless lives that had been touched by their example of choosing service over self-interest. The Queen's gamble in transforming their potential scandal into imperial asset had proven one of the most successful personnel decisions of her reign, demonstrating that even the most dangerous human emotions could be harnessed for the greater good when guided by wisdom and compassion.